Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this fifth seminar of the Italian Reproducibility Network. All these seminars are kindly supported by Italian Association of Psychology, which we thank you very much for their support. I'm very pleased to introduce you today's speaker, Professor Uta Wehn, who is going to talk about citizen science. Professor Uta Wehn is a professor of citizen science and sustainability at IHE Delft Institute of Water Education in the Netherlands, in Leiden University. She leads action research in Europe and the Global South on how innovative societal engagement in data and knowledge co-creation and sharing can help trigger transformative changes in science, policy, and society towards participatory environmental governance and sustainable societies. She has substantial experience as project coordinator and principal investigator of large multidisciplinary projects on citizen science and living labs for water and environmental challenges, in which she collaborates with diverse organizations from the public and private sector, academia, as well as civil society. Her research has been funded by a range of funders, including several EU framework programs, the European Space Agency, the Coca-Cola Foundation, MISTRA, and the Dutch government, among others. Currently, she is the coordinator of the More for Nature project and the co-chair of the Global Citizen Science and Open Science Community of Practice. Uta, you are very welcome. You are very happy to have you here today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. And let me just share my slides. I hope that it's working. Yes.
It is.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure here to join you this afternoon and share with you my perspective of the role of citizen science in opening science to society. So when we talk about open science, and I realize this is an open science seminar, so I'm sure that this is familiar to you. But luckily, when we talk about open science, we can draw on what is by now an internationally agreed definition of open science that goes hand in hand with a set of shared values and guiding principles of how we practice open science in the global community. And in principle, that should help making scientific research from all fields accessible to everyone for the benefits of scientists, but also society. And it comes with 4 pillars that together ideally help making science not only more open and accessible, but also that actually the production of knowledge in itself is more inclusive, equitable, and sustainable. Talking about we have the sustainability goals, which I'm sure are familiar to you, and they come into the context of open science because it was actually the rationale for coming up with the UNESCO recommendation on open science to say, not only as a society, as a global society, can we not achieve the SDGs with business as usual, we also cannot achieve the SDGs with science as usual. So there is a big interest to actually rethink how we do science and what the role of science is in the societal efforts to become more sustainable. So opening science to society indeed has these 4 pillars, and I'm sharing them here with just 2 of them that have a particular relevance when we talk about opening science to society. That's the orange pillar of open engagement of societal actors, and the blue pillar, the blue piece of the puzzle of open dialogue with other knowledge systems. And both of those pillars really take us into the realm of societal actors, stakeholders dealing with people, whereas the other aspects are more the tangible part, the codified parts of knowledge, data and knowledge, but also the really important part of infrastructures. But my discussion then on citizen science, as you can see, in fact, citizen science is explicitly featured amongst those pillars in the open engagement of societal actors. Citizen and participatory science is one of those important facets of the ways in which we can really open science to civil society actors through open engagement of societal actors. And my work, as you have kindly also illustrated in the introduction, is very much in the field of water and environment, and looking at citizen science from an action research perspective. So that means very often I'm involved in actually helping to set up such initiatives, or helping to enhance existing initiatives, helping to develop methodologies for setting up such initiatives, or measuring the impact. So it's really a wide variety of roles that I have in this field. And as you can see, also, it really spans a whole range of not only geographical settings, but socioeconomic contexts in which citizen science is done, and in which I have the opportunity to actually help advance the science of citizen science by grounding it in very different realities. So what I'd like to share with you today then, when we talk about citizen science and the role of citizen science in opening science to society, is actually what I think are some of the myths that are around about citizen science, and what are some of the realities. And would like to talk you through those for us to have a better understanding what we actually mean when we talk about citizen science, what comes into play when we want to practice citizen science, and then to finish off also, what are some starting points for those of you who are perhaps interested to use citizen science in your own scientific research, to know where can you start. So let's start with myth number one. And this is very often heard, that citizen science is only about data. In fact, citizen science, is really the quintessence of it is the contribution of volunteers, members of the public, to science via data collection. And while that is, of course, part of what citizen science is about, there's actually a whole landscape of citizen science approaches, and what's suitable really depends on various dynamics amongst actors, resources, etc., as we shall see. But let's start off and really unpack the fact that citizen science is more than just data and more than just data collection. And that really takes us to the scientific method, which I hope you will recognize from your own practice. So the scientific production of knowledge starts with a research question, with a gap of knowledge. We design a study to fill that gap of knowledge. There's data collection involved, then the analysis and interpretation of the data. We understand the results, and we take action. As scientists, that's typically publication, but decision makers may act on the scientifically produced knowledge through management actions. But then on the right-hand side, you see that actually the involvement of members of the public can be in far more stages of the scientific method than just the data collection. And it can actually take a whole range of forms, even within data collection or the data processing parts, etc. But also even starting at the definition of research questions. So ideally, we can consider citizen science, therefore, as a whole landscape of potential means of involvement in different steps of the scientific method. And there have been efforts to try and create some order in this understanding. And one is to say we can actually distinguish distinctly different types of science-driven citizen science. These are often referred to as contributory projects when they focus only involving people in the data collection. Collaborative projects scope the involvement a bit broader and involve participants perhaps also in the analysis or in the communication of research results, whereas the co-created projects really go all the way and from start to end, from co-designing the questions to collecting data, analyzing it, communicating it, etc. So the co-created projects, let's say, are the most fully fledged in terms of involvement. All of them have their role, all of them have their place in the landscape of approaches, and they really serve different purposes. But I think it is really important to recognize that there are distinct ways of involving members of the public, sometimes in a more narrow way and sometimes in a more comprehensive way. And this is really very much applicable in the science-driven citizen science context, when the primary purpose of citizen science is to contribute to the production of scientific knowledge. But as we see, there are also many other forms and ways in which citizen science can actually contribute, and not only in terms of who's actually in charge, who's the main knowledge producer, is it the research community or is it more the citizens in the local communities, as you see on the vertical axis in this nice matrix, but actually is what are we doing it for? Are we doing citizen science primarily to answer scientific questions, so that the pure production of scientific knowledge? Or as we go horizontally further to the right, we see forms of citizen science that are far more action focused, that are trying to change things in the real world, in this case, conceptualized very much in the socio-ecological systems, protecting nature, conserving nature, educating various levels of education, etc. So the action projects down to the conservation projects are examples where we are quite far away from the mere production of scientific knowledge, but citizen science actually practiced for quite a different purpose. So that really begs the question, what is citizen science? And in many respects, we can say actually it's ended up being an umbrella term for a whole range of activities and forms of interactions between scientists, between citizen scientists, members of the public, but even other stakeholders such as decision makers, industrial actors, etc. And as a summary, then we can see, okay, there is citizen science when it's science-driven really as a method for scientific knowledge production. We can consider that perhaps top-down. The civic mobilization is the exact opposite, where communities take the initiative to identify problems in their environment and to start monitoring air quality, water quality, etc. To say there's an issue here and we need a reliable data set to drive change. We also see that there's forms of citizen science that are perhaps best categorized as a public engagement with science, where the purpose is not the data collection or not the urgency for action, but actually creating a better understanding. What is science? And to create an improved trust in science. So data may be collected as part of such forms of citizen science, but the data is less important than the attention of the participants have for actually being part of the process, for better understanding how the scientific method works. And then the last circle on the right is the participation, and in my field, very much in environmental management and governance, that we see increasing initiatives that are actually coming from the authorities, from decision makers, from people who we as societies have put in charge in their role as civil servants, for example, to manage the environment, and who see an increasing benefit of involving citizens and communities, not only in monitoring the environment, but also different forms of management. So that's where the participatory approaches really sit. So we can really say what citizen science is very much, well, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. It really depends what we're doing citizen science for, with what resources, but particularly for what purpose. And therefore, we will, as we will see furthermore, that also shapes and influence who's actually engaged in the process of collecting, sharing, and using data for distinct purposes. So from myth number one, in the sense that one size fits all, we can see, well, actually, we really have a variety of shapes of size and shapes and sizes of citizen science. There's this landscape of approaches, and the suitability of one approach above another really depends on the ambitions, why we're doing it, and also on the dynamics amongst the actors involved. Moving on to myth number two, that citizen science is plug and play. Of course, in most forms of citizen science these days, technology is a key enabler, can be a key enabler. Apps are a very prominent tool in citizen science and have really helped to accelerate the uptake of citizen science. But actually, citizen science doesn't start, at least shouldn't in my view, start really with technology. But we actually need to understand what we need in the particular form of a citizen science that we want to practice. So it comes back to the ultimate purpose and goals of the initiative. And that actually determines how we go about it, how we design the initiative, or the extent to which we even co-design the initiative. And that brings us back to, are we working with a more contributory process with more narrow contribution of citizens, or do we go for a broader, more comprehensive approach that actually co-designs and involves members of the public in every step of the design of the approach? But either way, setting up citizen science really requires a careful approach. So then let's take one example here that has been published by colleagues in the journal Nature Sustainability. I think it's a good example of the science-driven citizen science, in this case in the context of ecology and environmental sciences, where there is, of course, the identification of a need or of a problem, but very nicely what they've conceptualized as step number 2, do we even need citizen science? Is citizen science the right approach for the issue, the problem, the knowledge gap that we're trying to fill? And from there, design the project, build the community, engage members, involve them in various aspects of data collection, analysis, etc., evaluate the project, and then see if there is further need for action. So really important, it doesn't start with technology, but it actually starts with the question whether we need citizen science at all. And I think the stages and the steps that we see here would be most suitable for approaches that are more contributory or collaborative in nature. So citizen science definitely isn't just plug and play. Technology is not enough, but it's also not a bilateral relationship just between citizens and scientists. It's multi-stakeholder. In many cases, there's an increasing ambition to produce science that's relevant for decision making. So that brings decision makers and policymakers on the scene. And again, it's a matter of choice, the extent to which, the stage at which also authorities are involved in setting up such initiatives. It's also not only multi-stakeholder, but also multi-dimensional. Technology is only one dimension. We need to be really clear where and what topic we're focusing on, what temporal dimensions we are dealing with, in which socio-political context we are working, what are the financial resources for setting up a citizen science initiative, and also what socioeconomic context are volunteers operating in, and what specific discipline or disciplines, plural, may we actually need to involve in the initiative to make sense. So there's quite a number of factors that come into play that we need to bear in mind. So what we see here then, that this myth of citizen science being plug and play, actually there's more involved. Citizen science requires a careful approach, and it's really the process by which it's designed and implemented that has such strong influence on the impact and the success and the claims that we can make about citizen science. Moving on to myth number 3. This is often assumed explicitly or implicitly, open the gates and here they come, and ideally they also stay. Citizen science quintessentially is about people. If we don't involve people, there's very little citizen science going on. And when we talk about people, then of course we talk about stakeholder interactions, how they get on amongst each other, stakeholder motivations, what motivates each of them, and also the simple fact that we're competing for people's attention, who have jobs, families, entertainment, all kinds of other things to perhaps consider what they may be doing with their time. So we're clearly realizing that we're dealing with incentives and barriers of the various stakeholders that we want to involve. And not everybody may be ready or willing or even able to participate in our initiative. And of course, the first stakeholder we think of are the citizens, the scientists, the citizen scientists, the volunteers, and it really is important that we make them feel welcome, and so that they join us not just once but over time. But we also can't take for granted the willingness, the interest, the ability, the openness of scientists and also decision makers to embrace this new way of data and knowledge co-production. So when we talk about incentives and barriers, it's very easy to focus only on the citizens and communities, but I would argue it's equally important also to take into account that we may need relevant scientific expertise, that we may, depending on the issue and the kind of initiative we're working with, we also need to engage relevant authorities and get them on board. So when we talk about stakeholders engagement, there's quite a number of things that come into play. And in the We Observe project, we produced what we call the We Observe cookbook. It's actually a big online resource. And you can see that by using a demand-driven user interface, the question, I want to engage stakeholders, has at least 3 dedicated pages that help us understand, okay, well, what context am I working in? How can I identify key stakeholders? And how can I actually learn to work with these different types of stakeholders? And how can I do that in ways that actually keeps them engaged over and motivated to work with the Citizen Science Initiative over time? So open the gates and here they come. So actually the reality is that engaging stakeholders in citizen science isn't easy, or certainly isn't always easy. Moving on to myth number 4, and this is also one that perhaps is familiar to you. That's one of the easiest objections that we often hear from both the scientific community, but also from authorities saying, yeah, but the quality of citizen science data is poor. So it's being dismissed before, the first data point is perhaps collected or is even looked at. But actually, data quality to begin with is an issue in all of science. We always need to pay attention to data quality in all scientific endeavors that we do, and it's no different in citizen science. Hang on. And it really depends what we want the data for. So if we're talking about what the consumer, the eventual user of the data is, whether we're looking at the producer perspective or we're looking at it from a standards perspective. So, and I've drawn here on a slide by a dear colleague of mine, Joan Mazot from CREAF, who's really the expert in data quality, standardization, and interoperability, and the perspective that it really matters, again, what's the data for and who's deciding on the quality in terms of eventual use or in terms of initial production, etc., is a major element in our judgment of the quality. So, but is there nothing we can do to ensure or to improve data quality? Well, actually quite a lot of things. Again, it starts with good design, a sound monitoring scheme, ideally also with advice and guidance from scientists, from relevant disciplines can help. We can also make sure that citizen scientists are properly trained, that it's really quite clear to them, what's required of them in order to ensure that the data that they provide is of sufficient quality and therefore will be used. We can also use schemes such as peer verification and expert validation. So these are 2 different judgments, let's say, that we can use, and there's also various forms of automatic validation. But to dispel this perception that data quality is bad, none of these steps on the left will be sufficient if we don't communicate about the technical measures that we're taking to ensure the data quality, because people will not change their mind. So that's really a crucial complementary activity that we need to do. So the myth is that the quality of citizen science data is poor, but the reality is that data quality requires careful attention in citizen science, just like in traditional science, in the broader sense, but perhaps also in some additional forms, as I have outlined. Right, moving on to myth number 5. Citizen science is the new normal. I wish it were, but I guess if it was, I might be out of a job as well. So we're not quite there yet. There is still quite a number of challenges to mainstreaming citizen science. There's a lack of awareness in many aspects of scientific endeavors, but also decision-making, that citizen science exists and what it can actually contribute. The acceptability, I've alluded to, the data quality issue is a major stumbling block to the acceptability of actually including citizen-generated data in decision-making or in scientific knowledge production. And last but not least, the sustainability of such initiatives. We see, luckily, increasing funding, certainly in the European landscape, but typically on a project basis. And as I mentioned before, citizen science is made up of people. And so we build communities, we engage volunteers, but then the project comes to an end, and then support for the community engagement, for the involvement, and actually delivering on the expectations often for actual change in their immediate environment is then really difficult to deliver on when the initiatives are relying mostly on a project basis, somewhere between 2 to 4 years of funding. So the myth that the citizen science is the new normal, as I said, unfortunately, we're not quite there yet, but working hard to get there. There are still quite substantial barriers, and the science of citizen science, the kind of field that I contribute to with my work, is still evolving. But the good news is that there is a lot of material that we can use, that there's expanding insights, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel every time we set up a citizen science initiative. I showed you the re:Observe cookbook already. There are many other resources. I'll come back to those in a second. Right, starting to sum up then, we looked at how citizen science can contribute to open science by really truly opening science to society. And in my view, it really cuts across these two pillars of open engagement of societal actors and open dialogue with other knowledge systems. Because I think the real strength in citizen science is that it helps us to open science in the process dimension, really opening up the process of producing scientific knowledge, but also increasingly evidence and knowledge relevant for decision making. We also come back to the SDGs, and I think hopefully it's also clear that a lot of the potential of citizen science with respect to the SDGs is that actually tapping into the people who are most affected by the issues that we're trying to address with the SDGs. So as this cartoon says, we are in the middle of all this, and it's often said that citizen scientists are the experts of their environment. We can argue whether that's the case, but people are certainly experiencing many of the challenges that we're trying to address with the SDGs firsthand, and as such are a really important knowledge holder and also help with generating data and insights about issues and phenomena that we're struggling with. And I think we can also argue to the extent to which, citizen science is the only way to achieve all the SDGs, as we had one survey respondent claim, but I think it's definitely a very important way of helping to contribute to achieving the SDGs. So I think we've really seen that there is great potential of citizen science, including for the SDGs, and the expectations are running really high, but I was hoping to give you a more nuanced answer with the myths that we've looked at from one size fits all, that we actually have a whole variety of shapes and sizes of citizen science with the landscape of approaches. Citizen science is not plug and play. Technology is a great enabler, but it's not enough to create meaningful initiatives. It's really the process that matters. Expecting that everybody will be as enthusiastic as we are about citizen science is also setting up for failure. So really clear attention and efforts focused on engaging stakeholders across the board has to be done. And paying attention to quality of citizen science data, citizen-generated data, as I argued, just for traditional science, but it's also a really good motivator and ensures that data will be taken up and taken seriously. The more we can improve the quality and the more we can articulate that we are taking such steps. And finally, that citizen science is not quite yet the new normal, but the field of science of citizen science is very much evolving, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's very helpful to realize that this is a field in its own right, and it's producing insights that can help us in a very practical way. So I thought it might be useful to finish off with featuring some of the items to help you get started with citizen science, should you wish to do so. So there's the scientific work on publications, just featuring one book here. There are many out there on the science of citizen science. There's the cookbook that I featured earlier. You can also download it in its entirety as a PDF. In the We Observe project, we also created a MOOC, a massive open online course on citizen science projects, how to make a difference with these. So that's open on the Future Earth platform. And there's also, in the European context, the European Citizen Science Association has the EU Citizen.science platform, where many projects are featured. There's enormous resources, training materials. You can connect with other organizations, platforms, and other users. And it also has biennial conferences that are increasing in size, and they're also a really good way of becoming part of the community of practitioners of citizen science. And I also take this opportunity for a quick pitch of the first conference that we're organizing on citizen science for water, where we hosted in Delft at the beginning of June. Registration is open. It's going to be a very interactive, dynamic conference for practitioners and experienced practitioners, newcomers alike, for people who really want to take a deep dive, pun intended, in how we can exploit citizen science for water across the board. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I'd be very happy for us to discuss any questions you may have.
Thank you, Uta, for your wonderful presentation. It was really interesting to hear what citizen science is about and all the lesson that you teach us of what it is and what it's not. So let's open now the Q&A session. So does anyone has a question for Uta? Okay, Michele?
Yes, thank you very much for your fascinating talk. I was wondering if from what I've understood of citizen science, it is a great way to answer to scientific questions, but also to teach citizens about what science is. I don't know. How do you feel about that? Do you think that citizen science really helps people, common people, to understand how science works and maybe increasing their trust in science?
Yeah, as I said, there's many forms of citizen science, and some of them are directed at particularly the aspect of the trust in science and also understanding what the scientific method is, therefore what its strengths and also weaknesses are. You will find that a lot of the answers to your and other questions that I will give is it depends, because I think it's very difficult to generalize. Not every form of citizen science can deliver this, nor does every form of citizen science intend to do it. So a lot of it depends how we do citizen science. So if our intention really is to increase public understanding of science, then we need to design an initiative that really creates the room for the discussion, for the questions, etc., and not an initiative that mostly gets people to focus on the data collection and actually has no further interaction and doesn't show people what happens with the data, what are the data management aspects, what are the analytical tools and questions, etc. So if we don't involve them in the other steps of the method, most likely their understanding of science and also their trust in science is not going to increase a great deal. So my point is, it has to match. Your intention with what you're trying to make happen in people's heads has to match with the activities that you involve in. And so citizen science is not a magic bullet that if I only, invite people, join this app and do your bird watching with the eBird app, what do I learn about science there, right? I don't even have a feedback mechanism mostly, although sometimes I do. Whether my observations are correct, whether I've picked the right categories is right. So the point is, you really have to have alignment with the intentions of why you're doing citizen science, with the expectations and with the activities that you put people to work on in order to achieve a better understanding, a greater trust in science.
Thank you.
Is there any other question? Well, I was wondering how people get involved in citizen science and how this kind of self-selection in participating in this kind of science impact the end results, according to you.
Yeah. Good question. There are many ways that people get involved. Online, of course, is a good way. There's platforms such as Zooniverse where people can explore all kinds of initiatives where mostly they're invited to contribute to the data analysis, not so much the data collection. People also find access to citizen science through their hobbies, through their interest. Yeah, I mentioned eBird already. People who like bird watching sooner or later, find that an interesting an enhancement of their activity. But it depends. Are they doing it for the purpose of being entertained and for further learning in their private activities, or are they trying to drive change in their local environment? I mentioned the bottom-up, the civic mobilization initiatives, where the self-selection is, I can see that the water in the canal behind my house is of really bad quality, and I want the relevant authorities to do something about it. And the regular monitoring that the authorities do is so infrequent, and I don't have access to the data. That may be a driver in a way of getting involved and looking for peers. We also see that existing societal structures are a good entry point into citizen science. Schools, for example, these are societal structures that we have for the purpose of education, but we also see that they're increasingly interested to engage with citizen science as a way of teaching science, etc. Now, when it comes to your question, how does it influence the results? It comes back to the question, well, what's the purpose of the initiative? If the purpose of the initiative is scientific knowledge production, self-selection is problematic, and it actually reflects on the researcher in charge of the research more than anybody else, right? And that comes back to the data quality and to the quality of the study design, which by implication means that if you want to use citizen science for sound production of scientific knowledge, you need to think it through all the way. Which are my target groups? What observations do I need? And therefore, what will be my engagement mechanisms and obligations? And do I actually have the resources for it? Do I have the expertise in my team, etc.? So we do see that there's an increasing interest in the field of citizen science to actually study who are the contributors. In parts of the world, particularly Scandinavia, we find it's mostly white old males above 60 with good salaries, pensions, and nice camera equipment who love, monitoring biodiversity, and that definitely biases the data set that they feed into, and that indeed ultimately can bias a decision. So the important part here is not to say you can't observe anymore. The important part is the metadata. The important part is that we know information about the data set, what its strengths and weaknesses are, and therefore if we use it, coming back to the purposes, for the purposes for which it's fit, and we don't use it for purposes for which it's clearly not fit.
Thank you very much. Is there any other question? Vittorio, please.
Yeah, thanks for this amazing talk. So this the seminar is actually part of a broad series of seminars dedicated to education. It's actually the education section of ITRN. So my question was whether we decided to organize an entire education section of ITRN because in Italy we lack of open science classes, for example, throughout universities. So we are trying to build sort of like common knowledge in open science. And my question would be whether you can name, like, for you, the most important, where to begin to teach citizen science practices to, for example, undergrads or graduate students. Where could we start, or what should we add, for example, to the program for next year program?
Okay, fantastic question. If only I got that one more often. Okay, right. Two thoughts here. As I said, ideally, citizen science would be the new normal, but it's not yet. And it's partly due to education and the extent to which we do or do not embrace this as part of the curriculum. So my dream is a world in which the scientific method inevitably requires people to think through, will I need some form of citizen science? Will I need to involve society in my study? And actually justify if they don't, right? So the new normal is that citizen science is part of the scientific method. And that means it needs to be part of scientific method teaching courses, etc. So it's already embraced there and not as seen something totally separate and as optional only. So as far as your curriculum, which I don't know exactly how it's structured, but I would imagine methods on courses on the scientific method are an ideal anchor for starting the thinking and preparing the ground. Now, how you actually teach it, of course, it comes back to space in your curriculum, how extensive you can be on this. In my own institute, where we focus on postgraduate education only, it's not part of our curriculum yet, but I have taught a short course on citizen science for water management, where people who have, done previous training with us or other, diverse types of water professionals come for a week to our institute. And actually it takes a whole week, to bring across the different facets of what is citizen science, what are the different options of designing it, implementing it, resourcing it, measuring the impacts, and all these other good things. So we're actually talking about a substantial piece in a curriculum potentially, but it depends, what room there is and what the ambitions are. But ultimately, I would like to think that it should become part of the normal teaching of the scientific method rather than being considered an optional add-on and a luxury.
Thanks.
Is there any other question from the public, from the audience? Okay. So let me say again, thank you, Uta, for being here today, for accepting our invitation to take this seminar. And we really appreciated your participation. And I'm going right now to launch a poll for those who need the certificate of attendance for the seminar. You can answer to the poll by stating if you need the certificate or not. And the poll is launched right now. And okay, this seminar, as the other seminar, will be, the recording of this seminar will be uploaded on YouTube. So if you're interested into recalling the wonderful information that Uta provided us, you can find it on our YouTube page. Our next seminar on the open science will be on the 9th of April at the same time of today. And we will have Dr. Lonnie Besançon, who is going to talk about a seminar entitled Is Science Self-Correcting? A Tale of Obscurantism, Slow Response, and Misconduct. Thank you again, everybody, for attending today's seminar, and have a nice day.